Welcome back to Secrets Exposed. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. You're the reason these stories worth sharing. Tell us where you're watching from, city or country. We're amazed by how far these tales reach. Subscribe our channel and press bell icon to get daily new and amazing stories for you. Alright, let's begin. The night was split open by gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the skeletal remains of an abandoned factory somewhere deep in enemy territory. Shards of glass crunched under combat boots as Ethan Cole moved like a shadow through the ruined structure, his rifle raised, his eyes sharp and unblinking. He was the kind of man who carried a storm behind his silence. Disciplined, focused, hardened by years of black ops missions that demanded more than most men could give. His earpiece crackled with the voice of his handler. "Move in, Cole. Sweep Sector 3. No mistakes." Ethan gave no reply. He never wasted words in the field. His breath came slow and steady as he signaled to his squad. 2 men flanking him, weapons cutting arcs through the dark. The air smelled of damp cement and rusted metal. Every sound amplified in the tense quiet between bursts of gunfire. Then, amid the chaos, his satellite phone vibrated. Just one buzz, insistent, cutting through the noise. Ethan frowned. Calls never came during missions, not unless it was life or death. He ducked behind a concrete pillar, one hand still on his rifle, and pulled the device from his vest. The screen glowed faintly. The caller ID read, Mark, his younger brother. Ethan's chest tightened. Mark never called when he was on deployment. Never. He hesitated, heart pounding, then pressed accept. Ethan. Mark's voice was shaking, rushed, like it had been ripped from him. "It's Liam. He's in the hospital." The line faltered as if Mark couldn't force the words out. "Ethan, your son, he's blind. They say acid." For a second, Ethan didn't breathe. The factory disappeared. The squad around him became ghosts. Even the gunfire outside sounded muted, swallowed by the silence exploding in his head. "What?" The word tore out of him, raw and broken. Mark's voice cracked on the other end. "Claire called me." Liam screaming. "They said Angela. She." Mark swallowed hard, his words tumbling over each other. "Just get back. Please. He needs you." Ethan's grip on the phone shook. He could picture Liam's face, the boy's wide smile, the way he always ran into Ethan's arms when he came home from deployment. His son's laughter still rang in his ears. And now, bandages, burns, blindness. "Daddy, it hurts." It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But Mark's voice carried the kind of fear that only came with truth. "Cole," his handler's voice snapped in his earpiece. "Focus. Stay in the fight. We need you here." Ethan's knees pressed into the cold floor, his rifle slipping slightly in his grip. His squad leader gestured impatiently. "Move forward, clear the sector." But Ethan's mind was no longer in the factory. His mission, his training, his years of service. All of it meant nothing compared to the thought of Liam crying in pain, calling for a father who wasn't there. The handler's voice came again, sharp as a knife. "This mission comes first. Do you understand?" Ethan looked down at his trembling hand, the phone still pressed to his ear. He thought of Liam's small voice, the voice Mark had relayed through tears. "Daddy, it hurts." His chest heaved, and for the first time in years, his hands felt unsteady. The factory was still dark and dangerous. His squad was still counting on him. But Ethan Cole, the man who had never abandoned a mission, felt something snap inside. The battle outside no longer mattered. Because a greater war had just begun, and this time, it wasn't on foreign soil. It was at home. The sterile smell of antiseptic clung to the air, heavy and sharp, as the fluorescent lights flickered above. The hospital corridor hummed with the low buzz of machines, punctuated only by the muffled cries of a child echoing down the hall. Nurses moved quickly, their faces drawn with pity. Inside a dimly lit room, Liam Cole lay on a bed far too big for his small body. His face was wrapped in thick white bandages, covering his eyes completely. Beneath the gauze, faint burns stretched along his cheeks, raw and blistered. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, every movement accompanied by a faint whimper. At his side, Claire sat hunched, her shoulders trembling. Her eyes were swollen from hours of tears, and her hand gripped Liam's tiny fingers like a lifeline. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing her lips against his hand. "Mommy's here." Her voice cracked. The doctor stood near the foot of the bed, his expression grim. "The burns are severe. We're still assessing the full damage, but the blindness may be permanent." His words hung heavy in the air, each one striking like a hammer. Claire let out a broken sob, bowing her head. Her voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "She did this." She turned suddenly, eyes blazing through her tears, locking onto the figure standing in the corner. Angela, perfectly dressed despite the chaos, her hair tied back neatly. Angela looked every bit the grieving stepmother. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white, tears shining in her eyes. "Claire, please," she said softly, her tone drenched in sorrow. "I would never hurt Liam. I love him like my own." Claire shot to her feet, her grief twisting into rage. "Don't lie to me. He told me you screamed at him, that you hated when he talked back. And now this." Her finger jabbed the air toward Angela, her voice trembling. "You threw it. You did this to my son." Angela flinched, but only for a second. Then her face crumpled in just the right way, her shoulders shaking as a sob tore from her lips. She pressed a hand to her chest, staggering back. "You don't understand. I was in the kitchen when it happened. He spilled the bottle himself. I ran in as soon as I heard him scream." Her voice broke, dripping with helplessness. The doctor looked between them, his brow furrowing. There was no evidence yet, only suspicion. "Right now, our focus has to be Liam," he said firmly. "Not blame." Claire turned back to her son, her anger dissolving into anguish. She sat down again, kissing his bandaged forehead, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy will make sure you're safe." Angela lingered at the edge of the room, watching, her face carefully painted with sorrow. But behind her damp eyes, something colder flickered, an impatience, a sharpness quickly hidden whenever someone glanced her way. "Mom!" Liam's tiny voice cracked through the air, trembling and weak. His bandaged face shifted slightly toward the sound. "It hurts. Did I do something bad?" Claire's heart shattered. She pulled him into her arms, stroking his hair. "No, baby. No. None of this is your fault." Angela stepped forward, crouching down beside the bed, her hand hovering near Liam's arm. "Sweetheart," she said in a voice sugar-coated with tenderness, "you know I'd never hurt you, right?" But Liam's body tensed. His small fingers gripped the blanket tighter, his lips pressed together in silence. He didn't answer. Claire's eyes narrowed, catching the flicker of fear on her son's face. For the first time, doubt seeped through the grief. Maybe Liam knew more than he could say, and maybe Angela's tears weren't what they seemed. The factory's silence had grown unbearable. Ethan stood behind the crumbling wall, his rifle hanging loose at his side, the phone still pressed against his ear even though the call had ended. The words replayed endlessly in his head. "Your son, blind. Acid." A sharp voice snapped through his earpiece. "Cole, do you copy? Advance now." But Ethan didn't move. His boots felt rooted in the cracked cement. The sounds of his squad clearing the upper level faded into a dull roar in his skull. All he could hear was Liam's trembling voice, relayed through Mark. "Daddy, it hurts." His handler's tone grew harsher. "Don't lose focus. We're too deep for hesitation." Focus. That word had defined Ethan's life, sharpening his senses, controlling his heartbeat, guiding his finger on the trigger. Focus had saved his life more times than he could count. But now, for the first time, focus betrayed him. Every image in his mind was of Liam's bandaged face, his son shrinking away from pain. Ethan wasn't there to stop. "Cole," the handler barked again. "This is an order." Ethan's hand shook around the radio. He forced his voice steady. "Order acknowledged." He killed the channel. The silence afterward was deafening, final. He crouched low, moving quickly out of the factory, ignoring the confused shouts of his teammates. His body knew the drill. Avoid spotlights, use the shadows, move silent and fast. But his mind was no longer on enemy territory. It was thousands of miles away, in a hospital room where his boy lay broken. By the time he reached the safe house, his breath was ragged, his chest tight. He slammed the door shut behind him, ripping off his helmet, sweat streaming down his temples. His reflection in the cracked mirror stared back at him. Hard, lined with years of combat, but now hollowed by fear. The phone buzzed again. Mark! Ethan snatched it up. Tell me he's stable. Mark's voice was shaky, too controlled beneath the panic. He's alive, Ethan, but Claire's falling apart. She says Angela did it. He paused. Listen, you can't just abandon the mission. You'll burn everything you've built. Stay. I don't care. Ethan's voice cut like a blade. My son needs me. I'm coming home. For a moment, silence. Then Mark exhaled heavily. Fine, but hurry. His words were clipped, strange, like something unsaid lingered between them. Ethan shoved the phone into his pocket, hands trembling as he began stripping off his gear. One by one, the tools of war clattered onto the floor. Rifle, knife, ammunition, each piece a reminder of who he had been, who he no longer could be. He grabbed his duffel bag, his fingers clumsy in their rush, stuffing in only the essentials. The plane waiting in the nearby airfield wasn't sanctioned. It would cost him his career, maybe his freedom, but that didn't matter. As he swung the bag over his shoulder, the handler's voice came through the radio one last time. Cole, if you walk out now, you're finished. You'll never wear this uniform again. Ethan paused at the doorway, his chest rising with the weight of the decision. He looked down at his hands, hands that had taken lives in silence, that had protected nations. But they had failed to protect what mattered most. His voice was low, final. Then I'm finished. He stepped out into the night, the air biting cold against his sweat-soaked skin. The safe house door swung shut behind him with a metallic clang. For years, Ethan Cole had fought wars for others. Now, for the first time, he was going home to fight one of his own. And deep down, he already knew this battle would cut deeper than any he had faced on foreign soil. The sun had barely risen, but the hospital waiting room buzzed with low whispers. News of Liam's attack had already rippled through the neighborhood, drawing in faces Ethan hadn't seen in years. Mothers clutching their children tighter, fathers shaking their heads in disbelief. All of them stunned that something so cruel could happen to a boy they knew. Claire sat hunched in a corner chair, her face pale and blotched from hours of crying. She twisted a crumpled tissue in her hands, her eyes fixed on the closed door of Liam's room. Every so often, her shoulders shook as another wave of silent tears broke through. Angela, in stark contrast, carried herself like porcelain. She sat upright, her hair neatly pinned, her blouse immaculate, as if she had stepped out of a magazine instead of a crime scene. A tissue was pressed delicately against the corner of her eye, though her cheeks were dry. She sniffled occasionally, just enough to keep up the image. Then the neighbors began to speak. I heard shouting from their house last week, Mrs. Green said, her voice low but certain. Angela's voice. It was sharp, like she was furious. And Liam was crying. Another neighbor leaned closer. I saw her buying bottles of harsh cleaning acid from the hardware store. Strong stuff. I thought it was odd. Why would anyone need that much? Claire's head snapped up, her eyes bloodshot but burning with fresh fire. She turned toward Angela, her voice cutting through the murmurs. You hated him, didn't you? Every time he talked back, every time he reminded you he wasn't yours, it drove you crazy. She stood, her finger trembling as she pointed. You threw that acid. Admit it. Angela flinched, tears springing instantly to her eyes. She clutched her chest, staggering a step back as though Claire's words had physically struck her. Claire, please, she whispered, her voice fragile, cracking at all the right places. I would never. Liam is like my own son. Yes, I scolded him. What parent doesn't? But I could never. Her words trailed off into a sob as she pressed the tissue harder against her face. The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Some seemed convinced by Angela's display, others clearly unsettled. The room teetered on a knife's edge between pity and suspicion. Claire's fury boiled over. She lunged forward, only to be stopped by a nurse who quickly stepped in, hands raised. Enough. This is a hospital. We will not have shouting matches here. Breathing hard, Claire allowed herself to be pulled back, but her glare never left Angela. You can fake tears all you want, she hissed. But I know what you did, and I'll prove it. Angela sank into her chair again, her head bowed, her body trembling with practiced fragility. But for a split second, when she thought no one was watching, her lips pressed into a tight, cold line. Her eyes, hidden by lowered lashes, flicked toward Claire with something darker than sorrow. Inside Liam's room, the boy stirred, his small hands twitching against the sheets. The doctor gently adjusted his bandages, his voice calm and clinical. The injuries were caused by deliberate contact. The pattern is too precise to be an accident. Claire's heart dropped further at the words. She turned toward the window, gripping the sill until her knuckles whitened. Deliberate. The word rang in her ears like a bell tolling doom. Angela peeked into the room, her face the perfect mask of grief. Is he in pain? She asked softly, her voice trembling. The doctor glanced at her, but gave no answer. Instead, his eyes lingered just a second too long, not with pity, but with quiet suspicion. The waiting room settled into silence, heavy and tense. Claire sank back in her chair, exhausted but fueled by rage. Angela folded her hands neatly in her lap, her expression carefully arranged into sorrow. But beneath that porcelain mask, something colder was brewing, and Liam's silence, his refusal to answer her gentle whispers, was the first crack in her facade. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled Liam's hospital room, soft but relentless, like a reminder that time was still moving even though his world had stopped. The blinds were half drawn, letting in thin slivers of pale morning light that stretched across the floor. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and burned flesh, a scent Claire would never forget. She sat close to Liam's bed, one hand clasping his small fingers, her thumb gently stroking the back of his hand. His skin felt hot, fragile, like holding a flame too long. He hadn't spoken much since the attack, only small whimpers and pained cries when the nurses adjusted his bandages. The doctor entered quietly, flipping through the chart at the end of the bed. His face was grave, his voice steady. The injuries are consistent, with a direct splash of corrosive liquid. The angles, the depth of the burns, they don't match an accidental spill. He looked up, his eyes heavy with the weight of what he was saying. This was deliberate. The words hit Claire like a hammer. Her chest tightened, and tears welled instantly. She pressed Liam's hand to her lips, whispering, "I'm so sorry, baby. I couldn't protect you." Angela, standing near the corner, gasped softly. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, her eyes shimmering. "Oh God," she whispered, voice breaking. "Who could do something so evil?" Claire snapped her head up, fury igniting. "You could." Her voice was sharp, accusing. Angela's tears spilled over at once, her body shaking as though the accusation had physically wounded her. "Claire, please," she choked. "You have to believe me. I would never hurt Liam. He means everything to me." She moved closer to the bed, her hand hovering just above Liam's arm. For the first time since waking, Liam stirred. His bandaged head shifted slightly toward Angela's voice. His lips trembled as he whispered, barely audible, Maybe it's my fault." Claire's breath caught. She leaned forward quickly, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart. No, none of this is your fault." But Liam's small body curled inward, his voice breaking. "I talked back. I made her mad. Maybe that's why." Claire's heart shattered. She pulled him into her arms as carefully as she could, rocking him against her chest. "No, baby, no. You didn't do anything wrong." Angela crouched lower, her tears flowing, though her eyes gleamed with something darker behind them. She reached out, brushing Liam's arm lightly. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her tone sweetened with syrup, "you know I love you. I only ever wanted what's best for you." Liam flinched under her touch, his small fingers tightening around Claire's hand instead. He didn't answer. Claire noticed. Her eyes locked on Angela, sharp and searching. But Angela kept her face composed, letting her shoulders tremble with manufactured grief. The doctor closed the chart quietly. "He needs rest," he said. "We'll continue treatment and pain management, but the burns will scar." As for his vision, it's too soon to say. Claire bowed her head, tears streaming freely now. Soaking Liam's hair, she whispered, "I'll never let anyone hurt you again. I promise." Angela straightened, dabbing her eyes with the corner of a tissue. Her voice was low, wounded. "I don't know how you can look at me and think I'd ever do this. But if you need someone to blame," she trailed off, letting the silence stretch, "I'll carry that weight." The words were clever, a martyr's performance. Some of the nurses in the hall, overhearing, looked at her with pity. Claire, though, saw the flicker of calculation in Angela's eyes. Liam's weak whisper broke the tension again. "Daddy's coming, right?" Claire squeezed his hand. Her voice trembled, but she forced a smile he couldn't see. "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy's coming." For the first time since the attack, a faint calmness settled over Liam's face. His breathing steadied, and his body relaxed against the pillows. Angela leaned back into the shadows, her expression unreadable. But behind her softened features, one thing was clear. She knew Ethan was on his way, and that changed everything. The automatic doors of the hospital slid open with a hiss, letting in a gust of cold night air. Ethan Cole stepped through, his military duffel still slung across one shoulder, his boots heavy against the polished floor. The long journey home clung to him in the dust on his jacket, the fatigue in his eyes, but none of it showed on his face. He was a man on fire inside, yet his expression was carved from stone. Nurses at the front desk turned to look. His presence commanded attention, broad shoulders, rigid posture, eyes that had seen too much war. But this was no battlefield. This was worse. He moved quickly down the hall, the echo of his boots mixing with the steady beep of machines. At the door of room 214, he stopped. His hand hovered over the handle, trembling slightly. For the first time in years, Ethan hesitated. Then he pushed the door open. The sight inside crushed him. Liam lay still in the bed, his face swaddled in layers of white bandages, his small body dwarfed by the sheets. His breathing was shallow, his lips parted as though whispering in sleep. The faint burns along his neck peeked out from under the gauze, angry red against pale skin. Ethan's throat closed. His knees weakened, and for a moment, the soldier almost collapsed. He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to one knee beside the bed, his large hand engulfing Liam's tiny fingers. "Buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm here. Daddy's here." Liam stirred faintly. His head shifted, bandages brushing against the pillow. "Dad." His voice was weak, cracked with pain. "Yes, son. Yes." Ethan pressed his forehead against Liam's hand, tears burning his eyes. "I'm not leaving you. Not ever again." From the corner of the room, a voice interrupted softly. "He's been asking for you nonstop." Ethan looked up. Claire sat by the window, her face gaunt, her eyes swollen red from crying. She tried to smile, but it came out broken. For a brief moment, Ethan saw the woman he had once loved, the one who had given him this boy. Their eyes locked, sharing pain without words. Then another presence shifted. Angela. She rose from the chair in the corner, her movements graceful, deliberate. Her face was streaked with dried tears, her blouse still pristine. She approached slowly, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice soaked in emotion. "Thank God you're here. I've been doing everything to keep him safe." Ethan stood, towering over her. His jaw clenched, his eyes sharp. "Safe." His voice was low, dangerous. "My son is blind. Where were you when this happened?" Angela recoiled slightly, her hands trembling as she brought them to her chest. I was in the kitchen. I heard him scream and ran in. He must have gotten into the bottle by himself. You have to believe me." Her eyes shimmered with tears, her lips trembling. Claire shot to her feet, rage igniting again. "Don't you dare lie. He's terrified of you. He won't even speak when you're near." Angela shook her head, stepping closer to Ethan, her voice desperate. "Please, Ethan. I love him like my own. I would never." But Ethan cut her off, his voice sharp as steel. "Stay away from him." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Angela's face faltered, her tears drying into something harder, colder. For just a flicker of a second, Her mask slipped. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing before she quickly lowered them again. The silence was broken only by Liam's soft whimper. Ethan immediately turned back, crouching beside his son, stroking his arm gently. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Claire stood at the foot of the bed, her chest rising and falling sharply. Her gaze moved between Ethan and Angela, a storm building behind her eyes. Angela stepped back into the shadows, her hands twisting the tissue in her grip. She lowered her gaze, hiding the fury smoldering just beneath her sorrowful act. For now, Ethan's return had shifted the balance in the room. But Angela knew, and Ethan could feel it in his bones. The real war hadn't even begun. The hospital quieted as night fell. The corridors that had bustled with voices during the day were now hushed. The only sounds the faint beeps of machines and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on polished floors. A heavy stillness settled over room 214, broken only by the steady rhythm of Liam's heart monitor. Ethan had finally been convinced to rest in the small cot down the hall, his body exhausted from the journey home. Claire, drained and fragile, had stepped out briefly to speak with the doctor about Liam's latest tests. For the first time in days, Liam was alone, or at least he thought he was. Angela lingered. She sat in the corner, her posture unusually rigid, her face half lit by the glow of the monitor. For hours she had worn her mask, soft smiles, gentle sighs, perfectly timed tears. But now, with no one else in the room, the mask slipped. Her eyes hardened, her lips pressed into a thin, cold line. She rose slowly, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor, and moved toward the bed. The shadows stretched across her face, sharpening her features into something almost unrecognizable. Liam stirred, sensing her presence. His small hands tightened around the blanket, his body shrinking into the mattress. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Angela leaned over him, her breath warm against his bandaged ear. Her tone was no longer sweet, no longer caring. It dripped with venom. "If you tell anyone it was me," she whispered, her words deliberate and slow, "I'll finish what I started. Do you understand, boy?" Liam's body stiffened. His lips trembled as silent tears leaked beneath the bandages. He tried to turn away, but Angela's hand hovered just above his arm, not touching, but close enough to make him feel trapped. "You'll stay quiet," she continued, her whisper sharp as a knife. "You'll let them believe what I say. Or else." Her words trailed off into a hiss, but the threat was clear. What Angela didn't know was that someone else was listening. At the doorway, a young nurse, Emily, had paused, clipboard in hand. She had come to check Liam's vitals, but froze the moment she heard Angela's voice. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her pulse hammering. She edged closer, her back pressed against the wall, just outside the door. Carefully, she slid her phone from her pocket, her hands trembling as she unlocked the screen. With one deep breath, she pressed record. Inside, Angela's voice sharpened even further. "You ruined everything, Liam. Your smart little mouth, your defiance. You made me do it. So don't you dare tell your daddy. Don't you dare." Liam whimpered softly, his voice cracking like dry leaves. "Please stop." Angela straightened, smoothing her blouse, her face calm once again. "Good boy," she whispered. She turned, her steps measured as she moved back toward the chair. By the time she sat down again, her expression had returned to grief, shoulders slumped, eyes glistening as if she'd spent the last few minutes praying. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She ended the recording, clutching the phone tightly against her scrubs. Her face was pale, but her resolve hardened. For days, suspicion had circled Angela like vultures. But now, Emily had the truth. Cold, undeniable, spoken straight from Angela's own mouth. She slipped quietly down the hall, her phone secure in her pocket. Tomorrow, the world would hear what Angela had whispered in the dark. And for Angela, the act was over. Morning light spilled weakly through the hospital blinds, washing the room in a pale, sterile glow. Machines hummed softly beside Liam's bed. He was awake but silent, his small frame stiff beneath the blanket, his bandaged face turned toward the sound of his father's steady breathing. Ethan sat close, one hand resting gently over his son's, as if anchoring him to safety. Claire hovered near the window, arms crossed, her face still streaked with exhaustion. Angela, dressed in another spotless blouse, perched in a corner like a statue of sorrow. Her eyes were puffy, her lips pressed into a fragile pout. To anyone else, she looked like a grieving mother holding herself together. But not to Liam. His body tensed every time she shifted, his fingers tightening around Ethan's hand. Then the door opened. Nurse Emily stepped inside, her expression grave. She clutched her phone tightly in one hand, her knuckles white. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole," she said carefully, her eyes flicking toward Angela. "There's something you need to hear." Angela's head tilted slightly, the faintest flicker of alarm flashing in her eyes before she masked it with confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Emily ignored her. She moved closer to Ethan and Claire, lowering her voice. "I was outside last night. I heard her. I recorded it." The words seemed to suck the air from the room. Ethan's jaw tightened. Claire's eyes widened, her breath catching. Emily unlocked her phone and pressed play. At once, the room filled with Angela's voice. No sweetness, no grief. Just venom. "If you tell anyone it was me, I'll finish what I started. Do you understand, boy?" The sound of Liam's whimper followed, breaking hearts in the silence. Claire gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. Her knees buckled, and she staggered back against the wall. Ethan's grip on Liam's hand tightened, his other fist curling so hard his knuckles turned white. Angela shot to her feet, her mask slipping for the first time. That recording is twisted. It's not what it sounds like." Her voice was sharp now, defensive, stripped of its practiced softness. Ethan stood slowly, his tall frame towering over her. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. "It sounds exactly like what it is. You threatened my son." Angela's face crumpled, but this time the tears looked different. Not crafted, but panicked. "He pushed me. He was disrespectful. Always talking back. Always reminding me I wasn't his mother. I lost control just once. Lost control." Claire's voice ripped through the room, shaking with fury. She stepped forward, her fingers stabbing the air toward Angela. "You blinded my son. You scarred him for life. And you dare call it losing control?" Angela's hands trembled, her breath coming fast. She looked around the room, desperate for sympathy, but found none. Ethan's eyes were burning coals. Claire's rage was a storm. And Liam, silent but shaking, finally whispered, "I don't want her here." The words broke whatever was left of Angela's act. Her tears dried instantly, replaced by a glare of pure hatred. "Ungrateful little brat," she spat before she could stop herself. The room fell into stunned silence. Ethan stepped forward in one swift motion, grabbing Angela by the arm. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a soldier who had stared death in the eyes. "You're finished here. You'll never come near my son again." Angela tried to twist free, her voice rising in desperation. "You don't understand. I did it for us, for this family. He needed discipline." But her words only dug her deeper. The door opened again, and two officers stepped inside, summoned earlier by Emily. They took one look at the recording, the scene, the terror etched into Liam's trembling body, and moved forward. Angela's eyes darted wildly as they clasped her wrists in cold steel. "You can't do this. I was trying to help him. I was trying to hold this family together." Her screams echoed down the hall as she was dragged out, her mask shattered beyond repair. Inside the room, silence returned. Claire collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Ethan sank down beside Liam again, taking his son's hand in both of his. "It's over, buddy," he whispered, though his eyes were still shadowed with doubt. "She can't hurt you anymore." But as he held Liam close, Ethan couldn't shake one gnawing thought. Angela was guilty, yes, but something about the way she said, "I did it for us," stuck in his mind like a thorn. There was more to this story, and he knew it. The hospital room was quieter now, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence that follows a storm. Claire sat beside Liam's bed, gently stroking his arm as he slept. His breathing was steady, but his small body twitched every so often, haunted even in dreams. Ethan leaned against the wall, his arms folded tightly across his chest. His eyes didn't leave the door where Angela had been dragged out hours earlier. The image of her twisted face, her scream of "I did it for us," replayed in his mind like a poisoned echo. He should have felt relief. Angela was gone, exposed. Liam was safe. But something gnawed at him, something sharp, something unfinished. A knock broke the stillness. Detective Harris, a seasoned officer with tired eyes, stepped inside. He nodded politely to Claire, then moved toward Ethan. "We've started digging into Angela's background," he said, flipping open a folder. "There's something strange you need to see." He laid down a sheet of paper, a bank statement. The numbers glared up at them, rows of deposits and withdrawals. Ethan frowned. "What am I looking at?" "Angela's account," Harris explained. "A week before the attack, she received a large transfer. $5,000. The sender's name?" He tapped the line with his finger. "Mark Cole." The world tilted. Ethan's arms slowly dropped to his sides, his chest tightening as if the walls themselves were closing in. "My brother?" Claire jerked upright, her voice trembling. "That can't be right. Mark called me after the attack. He sounded devastated." Harris shook his head. "The money trail doesn't lie. Angela wasn't working alone. She was funded. And your brother's name is on the wire." Ethan's jaw clenched. He tried to steady his breathing, but his mind was already racing through every detail of the past few days. Mark had been the first one to call him on the mission. Mark had insisted Ethan stay focused, not come home. Mark had sounded too calm, too measured, even when delivering the worst news of Ethan's life. Why would he? Claire's voice broke, her eyes wide. Ethan answered before Harris could. His voice was low, grim. "Because he's always wanted what I had." Memories stabbed at him like shards of glass. Mark's lingering stares at Claire back when they were still married. His jealous comments about Ethan's military career, the respect he earned, the life he lived. It had been subtle, easy to dismiss, until now. "Do you think," Claire's voice faltered. She swallowed hard. "Do you think he wanted Angela to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan's silence was enough. Harris closed the folder. "We'll need to question him. But if this is true, Angela may have just been the weapon. Your brother, he could be the hand that aimed her." Claire buried her face in her hands, sobbing. The thought was unbearable, betrayal not just by a stepmother, but by blood. Ethan moved to Liam's side, kneeling down. He brushed his hand gently over his son's blanket. "Buddy," he whispered, his voice shaking, "I promised you I'd protect you. And I will, even if the monster wears my brother's face." Liam stirred in his sleep, his lips parting with a fragile murmur. "Daddy, don't leave me." Ethan's throat tightened. "I won't, son. Not this time. Not ever." Behind him, Claire's sobs filled the room. Harris lingered near the door, his eyes grave. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they revealed was darker than Ethan had imagined. Angela was guilty, yes, but she had been a pawn. The real betrayal ran deeper. And the next confrontation wouldn't just test Ethan's strength as a soldier. It would test him as a brother. The late evening air outside the hospital was damp and heavy, carrying the faint smell of rain. Ethan's boots pounded against the pavement as he strode down the nearly empty street, each step filled with fury he could no longer contain. The folder Detective Harris had handed him still burned in his grip, the proof that his own brother had wired money to Angela days before Liam's life was destroyed. The address wasn't far. Mark's office, a modest two-story building tucked away behind the main road, glowed faintly with light through its blinds. At this hour, it should have been dark, but Mark was inside, working late. Or maybe waiting. Ethan's jaw tightened as he pushed the door open. Mark looked up from behind his desk. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, but his face carried none of the exhaustion of a man working late. Instead, his eyes sharpened the moment they landed on Ethan, a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by calm. "Ethan," Mark said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "You made it home." Ethan threw the folder onto the desk. The papers fanned out, exposing the wire transfer, Angela's name, and Mark's signature. His voice was low, almost trembling with controlled rage. "Tell me what this is." Mark glanced down, then back up, his expression unreadable. "Exactly what it looks like." Ethan's fists clenched. "You paid her. You knew." Mark sighed, as though disappointed, not guilty. "I didn't know she'd go that far. I gave her money to manage things. Claire's always been unstable. And you," he leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "You've always been gone. Someone had to hold it all together." Ethan's eyes burned. "Hold it together? You blinded my son." Mark's calm cracked just slightly. His jaw tensed, his voice rising. "Don't act like you've been the perfect father. You were halfway across the world while he was crying at night. While Claire was drowning. He cut himself off, but his slip was enough. Ethan's stomach dropped. "While you what?" Mark's eyes flickered with something darker, something possessive. "While I was there, picking up the pieces you left behind. Claire needed someone steady. Liam needed someone who wasn't a ghost. You think you're a hero, Ethan, but all you've ever done is abandon them." Ethan's breath came heavy, his hands trembling at his sides. "So you thought you could replace me? By paying her to terrorize my son?" Mark's lips curled into something cold, almost a smirk. Angela wasn't supposed to hurt him. She was supposed to scare him. Make Claire see how fragile things were with you gone. She would have turned to me, finally. Everything would have fallen into place. Ethan's voice dropped to a growl. "You used my son as leverage." Mark didn't flinch. "I did what you couldn't. I stayed. I built a life here. And Claire saw it. She saw me." The room vibrated with silence. Ethan stared at his brother, the man who had shared his childhood, who had once been his closest ally. Now he saw a stranger, twisted by envy, driven by desire for what was never his. "You'll never have her," Ethan said, his voice steady, final. "And you'll never be his father." Mark leaned back, his calm returning, a smugness in his tone. "We'll see what the law says when it's my word against a soldier who abandoned his post. You think you're untouchable, Ethan? You're not." Ethan's hand twitched at his side. Years of training screamed at him to end it here, to silence the betrayal once and for all. But another voice, Liam's fragile whisper, cut through his fury. "Daddy, don't leave me." Ethan straightened, his eyes locked on Mark's. "This isn't war, brother. This is family. And family doesn't forget betrayal." He turned and walked out, his boots echoing on the floor, leaving Mark sitting in the glow of the desk lamp. But as the door closed, Mark's voice called after him, low and taunting. "You can't protect them forever, Ethan. Sooner or later, they'll see who you really are." Ethan didn't answer, but his fists clenched tighter with every step. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The interrogation room was small, dimly lit, its single metal table gleaming under the harsh fluorescent bulb above. Angela sat hunched in the chair, her wrists chained loosely to the tabletop. Gone was the polished blouse, the carefully painted tears. In her place sat a woman stripped of her mask, her face pale, hair tangled, eyes darting like a trapped animal's. Detective Harris leaned forward, his notebook open but untouched. His voice was calm, steady. "Angela, the recording is enough to bury you. The threats, the boy's injuries, the financial transfer. You're already facing years, maybe decades. The only chance you have to lessen this is to tell us everything." Angela's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, silence. Then, slowly the cracks began to show. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice hollow. "I never wanted this. Not like this." Harris's gaze hardened. "Then explain it. Who pushed you? Who gave you the money?" Angela's hands shook against the cuffs. Her voice cracked, sharp with panic. "It was Mark. He came to me weeks before it happened. He said Claire was breaking, that Ethan being gone left a void. He promised me stability if I helped. He said if Liam feared me, Claire would lean on him, that he could fix everything." Harris scribbled notes, but his eyes never left her face. "So you agreed to hurt a child? To scar him for life?" Angela's shoulders sagged, tears spilling freely now. "Not crafted, but desperate. I thought I could scare him. Just scare him." Mark said one incident would be enough, that Claire would see Ethan couldn't protect them from afar. I didn't mean to blind him. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. It was supposed to be quick. A splash, a scream, that's all. But it burned more than I thought. He screamed so loud. And her voice broke completely. Across town, in the hospital, Ethan and Claire sat in Detective Harris's office, watching through a small monitor as Angela's confession streamed live. Claire's body shook violently, her hands clutching her mouth as if holding back vomit. She knew. Claire whispered, tears streaking her face. She knew exactly what she was doing. Ethan's jaw was rigid, his eyes narrowed, but the muscle in his cheek twitched as Angela's words sank in. It wasn't just Angela. It was Mark's hand guiding hers. On the monitor, Harris pressed harder. Why would you follow him? Why trust Mark? Angela looked up, her face blotched with tears. Because he made me believe. He said we could be something. That Claire was weak, that Ethan was never coming home. He promised me I'd have a family that was mine. Claire's breath hitched, the truth hitting her like a blade. He told her that. Ethan didn't answer, but his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Angela's voice grew softer, broken. I thought I was saving us, but I was just his weapon. He used me. And now Liam will never forgive me. No one will. Harris leaned back, his pen still. His expression carried no pity. You're right. He used you, and now you'll pay for it. The screen went black as the recording ended. The silence in the office was suffocating. Claire collapsed into the chair beside Ethan, her sobs uncontrollable. Your brother? How could he? How could he hate you enough to do this? Ethan stared at the blank screen, his chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. It's not just hate, he said finally, his voice steady but cold. It's envy. He wanted everything I had, my wife, my son, my life. And when he couldn't have it, he destroyed it. Claire covered her face, shaking her head. I let him close. I trusted him around Liam. Her voice broke. I'll never forgive myself. Ethan turned toward her, his eyes softer now, but shadowed with grief. Don't blame yourself. This wasn't your burden. It was his choice. His betrayal. For a moment, their pain united them. The ex-husband and wife, scarred by the same wound, bound by the same betrayal. But underneath that fragile connection, Ethan felt the weight of what came next pressing down on him. Angela had confessed, yes, but the real confrontation was still ahead. Mark had always been his brother. Now he was his enemy. And Ethan knew that when they met again, only one of them would walk away with family left to protect. The night was cold, the kind of cold that sank into bone. Ethan drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his jaw locked, his eyes unblinking on the road ahead. The city lights blurred past in streaks of yellow and white, but all he saw was his brother's face, calm, smug, dripping with betrayal. By the time he reached Mark's house, the rage simmering inside him had turned to steel. He stepped out of the car, boots crunching against the gravel driveway. The house was quiet, the windows glowing faintly with warm light, too peaceful for the storm that lived inside. Ethan didn't knock. He pushed the door open, his frame filling the entryway. Mark sat in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, as if he had been expecting him. The smirk on his lips sent fire through Ethan's veins. You saw her confession, Mark said, raising the glass slightly. So, I guess there's no point pretending anymore. Ethan's fists clenched. You used her. You paid her. You turned her into your weapon, and my son paid the price. Mark swirled the whiskey lazily, his voice cool. Don't be dramatic. I didn't blind him. She lost control. His smirk grew sharper. But if you'd been here, Ethan, maybe none of this would have happened. You chose war over family. I chose to be here. That's the difference between us. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and seething. The difference is I protect my family. You tried to steal them. Mark's composure cracked, his voice rising. Because they were mine. Claire leaned on me. Liam trusted me. I was the one holding them together while you played hero overseas. I deserve them, not you. The words hit like a blade, twisted with years of buried jealousy. Ethan's heart pounded, not with confusion anymore, but clarity. Mark's envy had always been there, festering in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You'll never be his father," Ethan said, his voice steady now, almost calm. "And Claire will never be yours. You can poison their lives, but you'll never replace me." Mark slammed the glass down, shards scattering across the floor. He stood, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won just because she's gone? You think Claire will run back to you now? No, she's broken. Liam's broken. I broke them. And nothing you do will fix that." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan's eyes locked on his brother's, the weight of betrayal pressing down harder than any battlefield he'd ever stood on. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice a blade of finality. "You didn't break them. You broke yourself." At that moment, flashing red and blue lights filled the windows. Police sirens wailed, breaking the still night. Mark's eyes widened, panic replacing arrogance. You call them?" he spat. Ethan didn't move, his voice cold. "You left a trail." Angela confessed. "It's over." The door burst open, officers storming inside. Mark thrashed, shouting, his voice cracking with desperation. "Ethan, don't let them take me. I'm your brother." But Ethan didn't move. He stood frozen, his jaw tight, watching as the man who had once shared his blood was dragged out in cuffs. Mark's screams echoed through the night, fading as the car door slammed. When silence finally returned, Ethan exhaled slowly. His chest was heavy, his hands trembling, but his decision was clear. Hours later, back at the hospital, Ethan slipped into Liam's room. The boy stirred, sensing his father's presence. "Dad!" His voice was soft, uncertain. "I'm here, buddy," Ethan whispered, sitting beside him. He brushed a hand gently over Liam's arm. "The monsters are gone." Liam's bandaged face tilted toward him, his lips trembling into a faint smile. "You promise?" Ethan's throat tightened. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to his son's hand. "I promise. They'll never touch you again." Claire, standing by the window, watched silently. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of peace in her expression. The room fell quiet, just the sound of Liam's steady breathing and the hum of machines. Ethan had fought wars across the world, but this battle, the one for his son against his own blood, had been the hardest of all. And though the scars would remain, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had kept his promise.